I hosted a Pokemon Infinite Fusion tournament, but with only Kanto Pokemon. Now, how did this go? What was the format like? And would I recommend you play it? I'll go over all of that in a bit. There is a lot to cover here. Let me just start off by saying that this was a tournament that I hosted in my Discord server. We had a good amount of people joining. I think it was like 16. It was double elimination. It took 28 days, but eventually Anir managed to win. And what you see in front of you here, this is the viability ranking that we decided on at the end. Me, Anir, and some other people that joined, as well as my moderators. Now, before anything else, what is Infinite Fusion? In short, there's a fan game that allows you to fuse Pokemon, and a Pokeathlon, which is very similar to Pokemon Showdown. They have an OU, I guess you can say, formats where you're actually able to fuse Pokemon and fight each other with them. How does this work? Well, in front of you, you see Gengar and Alakazam. In this little corner here, you'll see Fusion/Body. This is how you fuse Pokemon. So let's just put Gengar here, for example. And what do you know? There's now different sprites you can use. And there's now new typings. You can also switch between them. So, for example, this is a Psychic Poison. But if you press Swap, now it's a Ghost Psychic. And as you can see, the base stats kind of merge together. It's not just adding them, it's kind of... I guess you can say you still need to have, like, the base stat total of what the Pokemon you're fusing with, but this is the basic gist, and I hope, like, this makes enough sense. The move pools are also just combined, and there often ends up being a lot of signature moves, depending on what you fuse with. And this is what determined a lot of the Pokemon ended up here, and what they ended up when it came to certain placements. The very top 3 Pokemon were the ones that were used the most, and the ones that people thought were the best by far. You can't tell in this tier list, but some things were banned for having a fusion. Alakazam, Dragonite, Wussy, and Chansey. They're on the viability rankings because they were allowed to be used, but they were not allowed to be fused. And that's because all 4 of them were just kind of too overpowered when you can fuse them with anything. For Dragonite, for example, it's just a little too much to deal with, considering everything can be given, or could be giving Dragonite Extreme Speed Stab. You can fuse it with Snorlax for insane bulk and normal stab priority Extreme Speed, fuse it with Galvanized Golem, or most likely Pixelate Sylveon. Really dangerous. Definitely not something you want to deal with. Chansey and Wussy just makes everything way too tanky and gives them natural cure. And Alakazam makes everything too fast and has Magic Guard. Those are the reasons why those couldn't fuse. But even then, they still ended up doing pretty decently. The absolute top, though, is Scizor, Clefable, and Gengar. And all these have their own reasons for doing so. Scizor is just a great Pokemon, and Technician obviously makes basically everything better. Not to mention that Steel typing is just fantastic. Most of the time you were using Technician, as you can probably expect. Give something Sword Stance, and then you can just OHKO a lot of things. But it's also worth noting that you had the potential to be a special attacker as well. Fuse it with the second best Pokemon, for example, Clefable. You have Technician, and now you can boost things like Draining Kiss. And for Gengar, it had a fusion with Mr. Mime, where it becomes a Ghost Fairy type, and you Technician boost Ominous Wind, Draining Kiss, Icy Wind, and Charge Beam. But despite that, there's also sets where you don't use Technician. You'll see it later, but one example would be fusing it with a Grass type. Maybe it's something like Alolan Executor, and you have a Grass Steel type with your Generator. That's pretty good. The Fable, on the other hand, is mostly here because of Magic Guard, bulky stats, and because of the Fairy type. I don't need to explain it too much. It can just do basically whatever you want it to. It can go for Thunder Wave, Stealth Rock, Calm Mind. I think it has Wish as well. Really great stuff. As for Gengar, Gengar here is just probably the best offensive mon in the tier. And a very important thing you need to know is that even though it's modern, like, so for this we did National Dex Anything Goes for Gen 9, and even though it's Gen 9, Gengar still kept the Levitate ability. This alone is huge, since Gengar is now not weak to poison. Or not weak to poison, I mean, not have to suffer from its poison weakness of ground. But a lot of time it doesn't matter anyways, since you can just remove the poison type by fusing with something that's really good. But often that just makes Levitate even more broken, because it means that you can give Gengar anything you want. Any more resistances, any more immunities, you could just add a ground immunity to that. And the most popular Gengar fusion, I would say, was probably with Jolteon. This right here was a monster. High special attack, high speed, and look at that right there. Ghost Electric. With Levitate, this thing has no weaknesses that relate to its, electric type. Not weak to ground whatsoever. So it's just a pure ghost type, essentially, with an extra immunity. And it can just outspeed and kill so many things. And looking back at this tier list, notice how there's not really any dark types or ghost types. The highest ranked dark type is Galarian Moltres. And Umbreon's here, but not really used for, an offensive powerhouse. As for the ghost type, the next one you see is Annihilate in C2, which is not even an OU. So, one of the other massive benefits for Gengar here is that it basically doesn't have to worry about a ground weakness, especially if it's paired with Jolteon. And then after that, like, what do you use to beat it with? There's just not any good darker ghost types. And even with Moltres, or Galar, that ends up having its own issues, so yeah, because of all of that, Gengar can kind of just run rampant. It has good special attack and speed, so whatever you put it with is just very fast and hits hard as well. Completely terrifying. Next up is the Swole Twins. And these, I argue, were probably some of the most used Pokemon ever. And the reasoning is pretty obvious. Regenerator. Regenerator is just fantastic. Gives these things so much longevity. And also allows certain archetypes to become more viable. So, for example, like you'll see in D tier, there's Beedrill. The reason why Beedrill is surprisingly high up is because you can fuse it with something like Surfetch, and then has 120 attack, and you give it the Leak, which Surfetch has, and then Beedrill has Sniper. So now it has high critical hit rate, and it has an ability that boosts the power of critical hits if you land them. Top that with, what's it called? Attack Order, because that's a Beedrill signature move, and other high crit moves like Leaf Blade or Drill Run, and it hits really hard. But it's also 68 speed, which is not the best. But that's where the Swole Twins come in. They have Trick Room, and considering it's really hard to actually get them killed, it's a lot harder to actually, like, deal with Trick Room. It's not, like, the best strategy in the world, but I'd argue it's better here than in regular singles. It also helps they have other fusions, like Guts, Machamp, and Snorlax, so it's kind of like an Ursaring at home. You have Berserker and Scizor with Steely Spirit with 120 base power Iron Heads. Just completely terrifying. But that's not what you were using most of the Swole Twins for. Most of the Swole Twins, yeah, they were probably used on passive teams. But they were just the best support. You also have Scald, you have Thunder Wave, and also their typings. Slowbro gave things the water type, which in general is just a great defensive typing. And Slowking usually gave things poison. And since this isn't a Gen 1 video like I usually do, in the modern gen, poison's actually a good type. A very great one that gives you resistances to fighting, and more importantly, fairy. Now, it's a little, like, it's not as good, but On the tier below, there's regular Slowking. Regular Slowking is still good because it has the same benefits as Slowbro, but you're just giving special defense instead of physical defense. And often that ends up being better. I felt like Slowking ended up just giving things more rounded stats than Slowbro, which I personally liked. And it definitely helps that another Pokemon here that was good was Tangrowth, used for a lot of the same reasons, Regenerator. And you have the Grass type for a Earthquake resistance. These 4 Pokemon were just used on so many teams, and it was very annoying to deal with. But also not enough to where Stall was ever the best strategy around. In general, I would say the best strategy was bulky offense, which I would also argue is a sign of a healthy metagame. But that can change from person to person. Magnezone is here, and surprisingly, it's not really because of Magnapole. In fact, that's kind of a cheese ability that you not only can't rely on, but kind of just not very... It's just not very good at all. There's no reason to really talk about it. The main reasons for Magnezone is because it obviously has good stats, a really good special attack, but you're also able to take advantage of it with certain fusions. For example, I forget if it has a natural or if it's a signature move, but it has Steel Beam, and pair that with Clefable, and suddenly you have a extremely strong special steel move that doesn't take recoil. That's already pretty huge, and there's plenty of other Pokemon you're able to fuse it with, just lead to some very scary combinations. Another one is Magnezone and Gengar. I forget if it was me or if it was my mod Sotina. One of us came up with a fusion that was Gengar Magnezone, which I believe was a Poison Steel type, and with the Levitate, it's not quad weak to ground, and we used this on a rain team, so it wasn't weak to fire either, so I think it essentially had no weaknesses. That was pretty strong. There was other ways that it was used, but I'm struggling to remember them. If you played in the tournament, please remind me in the comments just what you use with Magnezone with. Zapdos is good as ever, and another big change here for Zapdos is the fact that it gets Lightning Rod. So, and also if you want to know why, it's because in Black and White, it was supposed to be its hidden ability, but never got it. And then in Gen 6, they changed it to Static. But Zapdos is also just pretty terrifying. Zapdos with Lightning Rod essentially gives any flying type, an electric immunity, which is a great help in of itself. But it also just leads to this very dangerous and offensive cores. Another one, yet again, is Gengar, but have a Ghost Flying type with Lightning Rod, and then you can give it, Weather Ball, and then a Hurricane. This is just absolutely terrifying if you are dealing with a rain team. And weather teams are usable here, because we have a setter for every single weather except for sand. There's Politoed, there's Ninetales, and a Ninetales Alola. We'll talk about those in a little bit. But just in general, Zapdos is still good for very Zapdos things, but just even better now. Kingdra is also just a great Swift Swim user. And the reason why it's so much higher up compared to, the rain setters, Politoed is in B1, and Kingdra's higher than that. The reason for that is because Kingdra is not only used on rain teams. Swift Swim is a good ability, but it's also one of the very few usable dragon types. Dragonite, since it can't fuse with things, kind of falls up a bit, not enough for OU. Alolan Exeggutor doesn't really use dragon moves at all, so that doesn't really leave you with much. But Kingdra is probably the best one we have. I think most of the time on Swift Swim it's special, but the most popular fusion doesn't even use Swift Swim. It's with Scizor, because Scizor and Kingdra can have Technician boosted Bullet Punch and Aqua Jet, as well as Scale Shot. It's not stab, but it's absolutely terrifying, especially with Sword Stance and a loaded dice. Jolteon is here because, a problem with when you fuse things is that they kinda, I guess you could say compromise. I think this is a good example here. Zapdos is base 100 speed, Gengar is base 110, but you fuse them together and it's 103. The stats are never gonna be higher than, like, its, like, base form, or it depends on, like, what you're trying to fuse with. Like, for example, Gengar, it's not by much, especially the special attack, but it is a little bit lower than normal. And while for Gengar, always when it comes to its fusion with Zapdos, it's not a big deal. There are definitely some Pokemon where you do lose out, like, tremendously. And that's what helps Jolteon. With 130 speed, it has plenty of speed to spare. So plenty of Pokemon now get a really good speed boost and have a chance to actually do something. One example, and it's pretty low on the tier list, but Charizard with Solar Power can maybe do something. But with base 100 speed, most of the time you fuse it with something, the speed tier at best ends up being around the 90s. But paired with Jolteon, you can have a Solar Power Electric Fire type that can kill a lot of things. And that's great. Weezings, both of them are good for OU, and a lot of it has to do with just their typing and abilities. Galarian Weezing has Neutralizing Gas, which I probably don't need to go over too much why that's good here, so I won't bother. Regular Weezing, on the other hand, it gives you the resistances of Poison, while also having Levitate, which not only gets rid of one of your main weaknesses, but a really good immunity as well. And for the most part, you're probably pairing Weezing with something like Umbreon for a Poison Dark type that has no weaknesses. It's honestly just really great support, and it makes things pretty bulky. So that's why both have managed to be here. Because another benefit to regular Weezing is also the fact that you still have the Poison type regardless if it's the head or the body. It doesn't always matter, but like I'll show you an example here with, let's say, Scizor and Kingdra. As you can see, like, depending on which is the head and which is the body, it leads to different stats and sometimes different typings. If you could, you'd probably use a Kingdra that's a Dragon Steel type. But unfortunately, like, both the Dragon and the Steel type are the secondary typings for the respective base Pokemon. So that's where it's just good to have Weezing, at least when it comes to the regular. But at the same time, the Fairy type is really good. And if you're using Galarian Weezing, you'd probably prefer to use just like Neutralizing Gas. And at that point, you're using the Fairy type, and the Fairy type's already good anyways. So it just depends. Mew is here because it's the best Spike user by far. We don't have too many good Spike users. We have Toadscruel, which I personally like, but other people didn't think it was the best thing in the world. We also have, like, technically things like Almastar and Sandy Shocks, but for the most part, they don't really work as Spikes users. But Mew is the best one. It also has Soft Blow, which is good. Teleport, which is also good. It technically has the best move pool, and it definitely does help you with a lot of, like, options, or even like certain things in team building. But the main thing holding Mew back is its typing. Psychic just isn't a good typing in modern Pokemon, which is very unfortunate, especially when there's knockoff everywhere. Mew suffers from that, but another thing that it has that is just really great is the fact that it has a high base stat total, and also it's 100 in everything. So regardless of what you fuse it with, most of the time it's usually pretty decently bulky and decently fast, which is good. So overall, not bad. Moltres, I didn't see a lot of, but the reasoning why it's here is obvious. High special attack, Flame Body's always nice, can definitely punish a lot of things. The flying type's also good. You have moves like Hurricane and Roost. And the only thing I remember it being used with was Gengar, I think for a devastating Levitate, Fire, Poison type. Which is, by the way, just a good typing. Another one I actually used it with was with Weezing. I used it with Weezing with Heavy Duty Boots. So it had just, honestly, Fire Poison just really good once you get rid of that ground weakness. It's kind of insane, actually, with Levitate. Because it has a quad resistance to Fairy, quad resistance to Bug, and I think it has a quad resistance to Grass as well. That's already 3 just quad resistances. A lot of wonder resistance to things like poison, steel, etc. Really, really good. Galarian Moltres is also good, and it's definitely the best Dark type we have. Fiery Wrath just helps you out a lot. And Berserk is a fun ability, but more often than not, you're fusing Moltres with something like a Fable with Magic Guards. You don't end up using it. Steelix is one of my favorite ones, and probably the most surprising one to end up in OU, but just in general, 200 base defense gives so many things a lot of options, and helps them out a lot. Same with the Steel typing. Also has Stealth Rock and Body Press. And some things can just have insanely high defense stats, and helps even better with things like Arcanine or Tauros with Intimidate. By far the best physical tank in the tier, and even better if you fuse it with something like Moltres or Articuno for the flying type to make a Corviknight a home. Except this Corviknight can have Lightning Rod, or Flame Body, or whatever else you want. The sky's the limit. Screamtail and Insanity Shocks are both here because we're just kind of treating them as regional variants for this tournament. And Screamtail was really nice. It had a cool thing where, because of just how Screamtail's stats are, like if you look at it here, it wasn't good enough for regular OU in Gen 9, but these are just kind of ridiculous if you really think about it. It has high stats and everything, but its attacks. Defense at 99 and special defense at 115 is crazy. Same with HP and speed. So no matter what you fuse it with, it ends up being just great. So for example, let's say we fuse it with Mew. Like, these are high stats, that's kind of stupid. And I don't think it matters what you swap it with. And the main one that was used was Alolan Persian. Alolan Persian, I don't think it was enough for OU, but it had the ability Fur Coat, which is very, very interesting since it doubles your defense. So you can do something like only put 80 in EVs. This is 202, and during the game, it's just doubled, and it's now 404. So you can fuse it, or not fuse, you can use the rest of the EVs for, special bulk or HP. You can have knockoff, you can have Wish, Stealth Rocks. If you want, you can use an offensive version with Screamtail. I tried using a Trick Room team with Flame or Gutsmith Champion Screamtail. You can make it fast, you can give something Dragon Dance, Swish, there's anything you want. And Screamtail just makes it work, which is awesome. I already talked about Alakazam. So, with Sam, you can't fuse, but luckily, it's still just a good Pokemon. Really fast, and the combination of Focus Blast, Dazzling Gleam, Psyshock, Energy Ball, these are all just really good moves to have. And there's also a big deal between whether it's Focus Sash or Life Guard. They can be pretty scary, but also Zam, I don't want to say matchup fish, but a lot of it does depend on what coverage you give it. And also priority is a big problem. That can just auto-kill it sometimes. Umbreon is one of the better tanks we have. And it has both Parting Shot and Wish. Also has really good defensive stats. Not too much I can really say about it. It's just pretty good. And Sylveon, surprisingly, isn't only used just for Pixelate. A lot of the time you're fusing it with something like Nidoqueen or Nidoking and using Sheer Force instead. So you don't even need a Pixelate. It also, I believe, has the... I forget, I think it's Magirna's signature move. I think it's, let's try to fuse it with, I don't know, Nidoking, for example. Or Nidoqueen, yeah, because the sprite is awesome. Yeah, Flare Cannon, wherever it is. Like, there's a Fairy-type Hyper Beam. And by the way, for these signature moves all the time, you do need the fuse in order to get access to them. But that's something that Sylveon has. That's really good. Along with that, it also has high special defense and also has Wish. So if you're trying to look for a fairy type that can give a Pokemon a lot of high special defense, often Sylveon is your only option. Which kind of sucks, but also good for Sylveon that gives it some viability. Galarian Zapdos is the best fighting type by far. Really good moves, the Thunderous Crick. You can fuse it with like a Swift Swim Pokemon like Kabutops for a dangerous Swift Swim user. Plenty of other options you can do, but we still have a lot to cover here, so let's keep moving on. Vaporeon's here because the water type's good, and also just high HP with Wish, good for support. Blissey can't fuse anything, but it doesn't matter, because Blissey is still Blissey. If you really need a consistent special defender, it's the one you use it for. Sandy Shanks is decently fast at 100 speed, and with both the electric and ground typing, there's a lot of things you can pair it with to be super devastating. For example, fusing with Sylveon, you have a ground fairy, and there's basically nothing that can resist that. And a lot of what I say for Sandy Shanks can also apply for Nidoking. Nidoking has perfect coverage, and with Life Orb and Sheer Force, it makes basically anything a devastating attacker. But the main issue for Sandy Shanks and Nidoking is the fact that they're decently fast, especially Sandy Shanks, but just not fast enough. Especially with their fusions. Like, I don't think any of them ever end up being over 100 speed. So without speed control, sometimes it's hard for them to get going and killing a lot of things. Now, there's a bit of a gap between Politoed and Alolan Ninetales and Mega Ninetales, but you can probably assume the reason why both are here. Politoed can give things like decently bulky stats, I guess, but it's mostly for Drizzle. And there's not really snow teams, it's mostly just Ninetales can give anything the fairy type, and then give it snow warning for Auroraville. Now for Alolan Executor is kind of funny. You're only really using it for its dragon type, making something a swole, bulky dragon, but that ends up being enough. Espeon is only here for magic balance. I would not bother with anything else. We didn't see a lot of Starmie and Tentacruel, but both have their own merits. A lot of good moves, such as Rapid Spin or Scald. They also have good coverage. They end up working a lot. Now, the two favorite ones that I saw for this tournament that I just love are Rhyperior and Paldean Tauros. Rhyperior gives a lot of things good attacking stats and good physical bulk and HP, and also Solid Rock. Solid Rock on anything that doesn't have two quad resistant or quad weaknesses is just fantastic. You absolutely love to see it, and a lot of people felt like it was overrated, but I felt like it was probably the most consistent ground type out of all of them. You're free to disagree with me if you want, but that's just my opinion. And on the tier list here, and if you look at the bottom, you'll see like Aqua and Blaze, but the Tauros is just here. It's just supposed to represent all of them. And in general, Paldean Tauros ends up being the best physical defender we have. Steelix is technically ranked higher, but I'll just say that Tauros is the best Intimidate Pokemon we have. And there's a lot of different ways you can use it. You can use it with Steelix to have a ground fighting type with Rocky Helmet and just high defense. It's hard to deal with. You can fuse it with something like Rhyperior for a ground water type with Intimidate with Sword Stance and Aqua Jet. That's terrifying. The speed is actually pretty good, so even for like physically defensive stuff, it still ends up being decently fast. A lot of different ways you can use Tauros, and that makes me very happy. Surfetch, there's two different reasons why Surfetch is here. One is because of its leak, which gives everything just significantly higher critical hit ratios, which, yeah, ends up being relevant a lot of the time. And unfortunately did become relevant in the tournament, especially near the end. You'll see that in a bit. And I don't think it was used as much, but there's also Scrappy. So this thing could be a fighting type that can actually hit ghost types, which is honestly pretty cool. But I think for the most part it was used for the weak and just giving Pokemon high critical hit ratios. Doing that essentially meant you don't have to worry about things like Choice Band or like Life Orb. Just you're kind of fishing, but most of the time it's in your favor. Arcanine has Intimidate, which is really good, and along with that also has Extreme Speed, Teleport, Dragon Dance. Why it has a lot of these moves, I don't know, but ends up helping it a lot. The main partner is usually with Sylveon, so you can use Extreme Speed, Pixelate Extreme Speed. I personally think it's a little too high. I wasn't impressed personally, but I gotta respect what, the other people said when we voted on this. Kabutops is here just as a physical swim sweeper, just enough to make it into OU. And then Ninetales is here at the very end. Sun is technically viable, but I will argue it's probably the weakest out of all the weathers. I'm not going to bother going over everything in the lower tiers, I'll just mention some fun ones. Alolan Sandslash, a lot of the time you don't have to worry about its quadruple weaknesses, and sometimes you even want the ice typing. For example, fuse Sandslash with Scizor, and suddenly you have Technician boosted Ice Shard and Bullet Punch. That's pretty good. Wiki is the best anti-weather Pokemon. With Cloud9 and good move pool and stats, it can kind of contribute in any battle. Aerodactyl has good speed, but the typing really holds it back. Blastoise has Water Spell, which actually gives us some options. Not to mention with Rapid Spin and Body Press, you can help use it for support as well. Sandslash has really bad stats, but in Infinite Fusion, anything you fuse it with gives 1,000 arrows. And 1,000 arrows alone just kind of gives you so many options with it. You can kind of put Sandslash on a team, but you kind of have to build around it. But having a ground move that can hit flying types absolutely gives you a great reason to build around Sandslash. Gyarados has Intimidate, and also with just good bulky stats, you can just use it to sort of be like a Landorus at home. With Sandslash, for example, you have a ground flying type with Intimidate. That's pretty good. It wasn't used too much, but I think there's a lot of potential there. Hisuian Arcanine, you can take advantage of just Rockhead and really powerful, recall moves. Its main partner was usually Aerodactyl, but it's still not the best thing. The last one I'll talk about is Toadscruel, which I personally liked. Second best Spike Setter. You can fuse it with something like Gyarados for, another version of a Landorus at home with ground flying type. And has some good utility. Now, there's a lot of other things on here, and I wish I had enough time to go over everything. If you are curious, though, in my Discord server, we have a thread where all of the links for the tournament were posted. So if you go there, you can see every single match that we had. But for now, to show you some more about the actual team building, I am going to talk about the 3 people who made it the farthest. 3rd place, Funny Man. 2nd place, Cyber DJ. And 1st place, Anir. I asked all of them to not only send me their teams, but also to just give me a bit of a background, or I guess you can say just description of each of the teams. We'll go over those, and once we go over those, I'll show you the matches of winners bracket winners bracket finals, losers bracket finals, and then grand finals. So let's start with 3rd place, shall we? And that would be with Funny Man. Funny Man has been in our tournaments before. Like, most of the time, when I do tournaments, they're in Gen 1. And if you're curious, please feel free to join us. Like I said, we did this in a Discord server. And in the Discord server, we do more than just Pokemon tournaments. At the moment, we also have a Minecraft server, which I personally like. I'm personally having a lot of fun with. And we are going to do more than just Gen 1. We're going to do other special tournaments for other generations. I don't know what it's going to be now, But whatever it's gonna be, we're gonna probably add new Pokemon in all generations, and it's a lot of fun. Alright, so let's start off with the first team that a Funny Man had, and this is supposed to be Funny Man. Sorry about that. I have there on my phone. I have what each of them wrote, so I'll just read that out while you can just look at the teams here. I guess that sounds pretty good. But yeah, here's what Funny Man said about this first team. This is a specially offensive team that worked pretty well for me. I should have used it more. Galarian Moltres plus regular Moltres. Goes crazy with Oblivion Wing plus Berserk. If it gets going, if it gets going, I got it to sweep when I was on like 2 occasions, but it has the potential to do crazy amounts of work. Zapmokuno is a menace. Ice, Electric, Fire, and the occasional Flying Stab can demolish unprepared teams. I was so scared of it that I brought Electivire plus Dewgaunt with Dickvat for a battle once. It works surprisingly well. I used U-turn on this one to pivot out of special defensive walls. Also, Zapmokuno in this format has Serengrace, and it's really disgusting. Tank Growth plus Steelix. It has a ton of defenses, and can set up rocks. And it can put other Pokemon to sleep. It can deal a lot of damage with 175 base defense body press. There's probably better fusions, but this one did the job well. Clefable plus Scizor was pretty common during the early stages of the tournament, but it seems that it largely fallen off. This one is a special attacker with Magic Guard plus Life Orb plus Steel Beam. It has negative speed nature with 8 speed EVs, so it can keep the 2 KO and busy with close combat. Magmortar plus Jolteon is fast. Hits hard with Volt Switch, not too much to say, but it does its part. And last but not least, Electivire plus Paldean Tauros. It's fully invested in a physical attacker in this team. If there's to tank Zapmokuno's attack, and hit back with devastating knockoff and or liquidation. Along with that, he also gave a description for another team he made. And it is this one right here. This is the one that he said he considered his better team. So starting off, we have Hitmontop plus Rhyperior. Does a ton of damage with Technician Rock Blast. And it matches up pretty well into teams of Blissey once you manage to get it into the field. Mach Punch for priority. Triple Axle for coverage, and Upper Hand to type Scizor fusions. Especially Kingzor. It's very frail, and its defensive type is pretty bad, so you gotta use it with a pivot move, which this team has in every Specialmon. Kingdra plus Scizor. This one can sweep weakened teams after a Sword Stance with Technician Aqua Jet plus Bullet Punch. Probably one of the best fusions, and that I would definitely agree with. Slowking plus Alolan Executor. It's a great defensive piece. This one has Trick Room to disable opponent's Trick Room and to synergize with Hitmontop and Storchamp. It also has Seismic Toss to hit other defensive teams, or defensive mons. Gengar plus Jolteon is a fast offensive mon that threatens large damage. I should have Energy Ball to hit ground types, but it was still pretty good. Starlax plus Machamp is one of the most terrifying wall breakers in the tier. One of my favorite fusions. It can deal over 60% to bulky Tangrowth fusions, and it can become an even greater threat with Trick Room. It also has insane bulk, so taking it down usually requires at least losing one mon of your own. Zapdos plus Moltres is a useful attacker that can resist attacks from many threats such as Magnezone plus Clefable, electric Pokemon thanks to Lightning Rod, and Zapmokuno. It's also fairly fast and hits pretty hard. So, honestly, pretty good teams. Anir managed to make it pretty far into the tournament. He managed to make it to 3rd place, only losing out to Cyber DJ, who lost to Anir in winners bracket finals. Speaking of Cyber DJ, this team right here you're seeing is actually one that I worked with him with. It started out as a team that I made because I wanted to do something with Trick Room, Rhyperior, Tauros, but then the speed ended up being too fast. So I tried doing something with Wave Crash and Reckless, but then Cyber saw the vision and worked on something completely different. So let's see what he had to say. Ground had this team built and used it against me in a practice game, so I tried modifying it to fit my style more. Balance, in the truest essence. Rhyperior's fusions here with a Reckless attacker and with Wave Crash turn bulky attacker that can set Stealth Rock on the field and punish contact damage. Aqua Jade is used since it doesn't get knocked off or flip turn with Aqua Tauros, so its utility with priority was the next best thing. Screamtail's fusion is just bulky support, which pairs decently to absorb the psychic hit the psychics with. Hits Moltres fusion would take otherwise, which made them decently effective thanks to Levitate plus Fur Coat with the respective mons. And this is the Moltres they're talking about. Moltres is also just really good. And even with that, like, defense stat, you're better off just using with special defense, you see here. Alakazam is a form of speed control and cleaner. Psyshock, Shadow Ball, and Focus Blast hit almost everything neutrally. Encore is there to bother defensive teams, or defensive Pokemon. And mainly things like Salt Boil for Slowking's fusions. Speaking of Slowking, Slowking's fusions here is a bulky progress maker thanks to Regenerator, and decent defensive stats alongside its Water Dragon typing, thanks to Alolan Executor. Scald, Draco Meteor, Ice Beam hits when it needs to. So Knockoff is the 4th best-ish move as a backup against cocky balance teams who think Screamtail is the only knocker. Alolan Sandslash fusion is here as a secondary speed control with dual stab, Connection priority in Ice Shard and Bullet Punch, really messing with certain offensive teams, and Earthquake just rounds out coverage. Roost is mainly here for safety net to ensure it's not relying on wish healing. In hindsight, U-Turn might have been better. One of my favorite teams from the tournament due to being more on the consistent side. So that was Cyber. Thank you for him. And last but not least, we have Anir, who, like I said, ended up winning the whole thing. Now, Anir gave me a few Pokepace teams, and I only decided to go with this one right here you see in front of you. But just know that he had one main team he tried working on, which was Triple Regenerator, and he tried spending most of the time just perfecting that team exactly. So, let's go and read what Anir had to say. So, as the team suggests, this is a defensive team based on the usage of 3 Regenerator Mons to work. Its goal is to win a game through slow, steady, and consistent chip damage via status from Toxic, Scald, and Will-O-Wisp, pivoting moves like U-Turn and Volt Switch, spammable moves from Moonblast, Flamethrower, and Scald, and other sources of chip like Stealth Rock. The end goal of the team is to force the enemy into a defensive position to allow a safe setup for Gengar to win. And I'm going to read out some of the things that he put here, but not all of them will be on screen, so I apologize for that. But let's just get going to some of the Pokemon that Anir thought were good for this format. Clefable. Best member with Stealth Rock Setter with the best defensive typing in the game. Magnezone Fusion because I wanted to keep Scizor for something else. Volt Switch to pivot and Moonblast for a strong stab. Magic Guard is an ability. All that is pretty standard. Volt Switch is interchangeable with Teleport on certain teams. However, most ground types don't want to switch on Moonblast, so the extra bit of chip damage is appreciated here. Maximum defense EVs that help deal with Dragonite and Scizor, all in a pretty classic set. Tangrowth, the first member of the Rage Core. He is a good option on the team for a magnitude of reasons. One is that unlike most team members, he has a good synergy with Scizor, meaning he can take full advantage of the additional steel typing. It makes for a great range check and a good way to sponge hits in case of emergency. Because of the regenerator heaviness on this team, and the consistent usage of pivoting moves, It doesn't really need a healing move and can afford to run Assault Vest, making it able to take some special attacks in a pinch. This idea is further reinforced through the low usage of spikes due to the lack of good setters. This fusion is mainly here to provide knock-up support and priority while helping the team defensively speaking. Earthquake is here to target pesky steel types like Magnezone and other Scizor fusions. Maximum attack EVs in Adamant Nature allows it to not be too passive and allow him to revenge kill with some decently strong Bullet Punch. Bulk EVs outside of HP aren't really needed here. Gengar. On a more defensive team like this, Gengar is in fact a very weird choice. However, the team is in a situation where, well, kind of passive, and Gengar happens to perfectly fix this issue. Jolteon Fusion is a classic, Stab Thunderbolt is always great, and no one is complaining here since this thing is the fastest thing around. Here I decided to use both as a breaker and a sweeper by using Encore plus Nazi Plot, and tandem with high special attack speed and great dual stab. Ground immunity is great on such a Frailmon, giving it good entry points as stated before. I used an Encore plus Nasty Plot set here, which forgoes immediate power and gives it the ability to snowball out of control very quickly, and punishes passive play incredibly well. See last fight of the tournament. The dual stab is enough. We don't need any prevalent dual immunity, so it goes good at creating progress. Heavy duty boots are here to provide more switch-in opportunity and put more pressure. It can effectively bait a pivot set and potentially bait the enemy in a defensive stance when it would be most deadly for them. Slowbro, second member of the Rage Core. Pretty classic teleport for slow momentum. Toxic plus Scald as good as it gets in progress and rival recovery. While Articuno as a fusion means it's weak to rocks, hence knockoff, it's here as the team's true anti-rain answer. It's physically tanky, and the typing provides resistances to valuable types such as Steel, Scizor, Fighting, and Water, while not being weak to grass and immune to ground. Valuable Mon and great defensive pieces. Good for both progress and pivot, it can very easily play offense and defense, especially on a team like this. Arcanine. Yes, it is quad weak to water, but it does wonder despite that. Great physical answer thanks to Intimidate, Will-O-Wisp, and 160 base defense. It can become somewhat tanky with special investment, Morning Sun for recovery, for pivot, and for Flamethrower for stab. It helps handling Sun and stuff like Berserker, Beedrill, or scaling physical monsters as a whole. As for long, no water coverage. Great Thing does wonder as it helps with the team weakness to very strong physical attackers. Decent Gengar check as well. Umbreon. The typing is dogshit and does wonder here. Great on any non-fairy Nido. Great versus Sam. Great versus virtually any non-Clef Mon. The thing is specifically what the last sweat wanted. Toxic plus Scald again. Slack off for recover and sure perception here for weather control. Like Arcanine, it helps versus Sun, but also provides useful tools against virtually any special attacker. The Mon is not great due to typing, but works wonders since it fills the gap of the team very well. Special Defense Invest is logical for what it does. It doesn't get one-hit KO by +2 Zam Dazzling Gleam, so it can work under rough situations. In terms of moveset, it's rather classic. I already did a full-ass paragraph on Gengar, which needed to be explained the most. In terms of history, the team first looked a bit different. Articuno was on Clefable, Gloking was fused with G Weezing, Swirlbro with Alolan Mug, and Nido plus Moltres was here instead of Arcanine. Nido plus Moltres didn't fit the team. While very powerful, it was too slow and didn't answer the team's few answers very well. Instead of making them worse, swapping it with a more defensive member allowed me to gain more utility on pivoting and provide a good defensive toolkit in the right scenario. Plus, it was able to actually switch on things. A-Mug was swapped out because I realized two things. One, a rain stopper without fighting resist was mid, and two, knockoff wasn't so valuable. Articuno provided more defensively, so I swapped to it. With no Articuno for Clef, I'm wondering what my last slot should be. It pretty much only needed to be able to pivot while not being entirely passive and stay unthreatened by most knockoff users. So, few fusions allow, and Magnezone was the one standing out. Steel Fairy is amazing. The loss of lefties is never a big deal for it, and Magic Guard makes it deceptively tanky. Plus, it's not passive with 118 special attack. Then, the last slot, and it was hard, I needed a mon that was not weak to Gengar, not weak to Nido, and could give me some weather control. The answer was my last regenerator on the team, King. However, the fusion was hard to decide. At first, I stayed on G Weezing, but it was too weak to Nido. The realization stuck. Normal / Psychic and Dark / Psychic were both unthreatened by Gengar, and Nido only had very specific fusion to take it out. Said fusion having trouble against Tangrowth and Swirl respectively, I thought it needed to be the most reliable possible. It came down to 4 mons: Wiki Wiki, Snorlax, Umbreon, and Moltres Galar. Wiki Wiki was the least tanky on the special side, but offered knockoff. Snorlax was tankier, but no knock. Umbreon was the second tankier, and G-Moltres was the least tanky, but offered nasty part potential. In the end, it came down to Snorlax vs Umbreon, and what typing I thought was the best. I decided that a Fairy weakness was less annoying than the Dark one and followed with Umbreon. In the end, it still gave me a decently tanky fusion with good options, and it worked. This team works. It's by far the most optimized one, and has an answer to almost anything you can think of. The Gengar is set by far the hardest to pilot, but under the right hands, it can be very rewarding. The lack of offensive pressure can definitely be felt, although it shouldn't be too much of an issue. I'm honestly happy with how the team worked out in its performance. Outside of Gengar, the team is very easy to use. Set Stealth Rock, spam annoying moves and heal when needed. Offensive moves are here to be here, you'll almost never use them. Then, when the enemy is making defensive moves, send Gengar and you can punish them, force them to go back on a faster playstyle. Repeat this until they either give up or have no mon remaining. And now that I finally finished reading all of that, you can look at the team for yourself. Sorry I didn't have this in front, but I just was really trying to focus on reading everything. But yeah, you can definitely see where Nier was coming with this. Cherry Reception, Toxic, Scald, Slack Off, a terrifying 123 special defense. With Slowbro here, honestly, with 93 in special defense and HP, even though it's a physical defender, it's just pretty tanky in general. This is the Arcanine they were talking about. I think the sprite looks kind of weird, but also, yeah, this is pretty annoying, all things considered. This is the Scizor they were talking about. Scizor with knockoff, or not knockoff, or technically, yeah. But with Assault Vest and Tango the Regenerator. I tried to face this thing, and I can confirm that it's very annoying to deal with. The Magnezone with doesn't even use Steel Beam, it just needs Volt Switch and Moonblast just to get the job done. And of course, the main progress maker being their Jolteon, which is just very scary all around. Okay, that's it for the teams. Thank you, the Funny Man, Cyber DJ, and Anir for sending me those. And now that that's taken care of, we can finally get on to the replays. Depending on how long this go, I might put these on fast, but for now, we're going to start with winners, and then we're going to keep going until we get to the grand finals. So the first match was Anir versus Cyber DJ, and let's see how this goes. So we start off, we have with Muck into Cyber's Sun team with Magnezone and Ninetales. Knockoff immediately hits, also poisons the Espeon fusion with, I believe that's Mr. Mime. They go into Clefabuzor, eats the Psychic move, and already this is off to a pretty bad start. They go into, Cyber goes into Arcanine, eats the Bullet Punch very easily, but they easily go into their Vaporeon Steelix fusion. Scald hits and gets the burn immediately. That's pretty annoying. They switch into their slow growth. Weather Ball does OHKO though, despite the special defense. Although that might be because, it's Tangrowth. Goes back in the muck. They go to Arcanine. Knockoff hits. Once again, getting the Poison Touch proc. This is going horrible. And already, Cyber's just at a really bad spot. Thankfully, it wasn't Rocky Head, but 2 poison monsters makes it super annoying. Web turn on the Sand Slash and Clefairy or Clefable fusion. Beedrill goes for U-turn. Doesn't get the crit, unfortunately, but it doesn't matter because here is the Steelix Vaporeon. You're forced to switch out again. You go for Wish. Cyber tries to set up Sun again, hoping they can maybe get an advantage. And now it's just, thankfully you go for Encore, so you're forced to go for Protect. How does Nier adapt to that? We will see. But Photosynthesis is pretty cool. Honestly, there's just really no reason why Nier just needs to, switch out. This Steelix is already doing so much progress. Goes for Scald, gets the burn. Cyber is probably molding, because every single proc Nier could have gotten, he has gotten. And that Poison Chip, that Burn Chip, and by the way, if you look at it now, 2 of his things are poisoned and 2 are burned. That is so hard to actually deal with. Weather Ball doesn't even get the kill. And the sun is now out. Yeah, this is going pretty abysmally. You eat the Ice Beam. Bullet Punch, I imagine, does kill here, especially with Burn Chip. So Cyber probably called that, but they went for U-turn instead. Still gets the kill, but at the very least, you do get good damage on. Beedrill probably doesn't do any much. It gets killed. 07s for Beedrill. Go back into the Steelix. And with Wish and... yeah, Cyber just had to sack that there. The Arcanite's now at higher power, but it's a physical variant, not a special. And even in the sun, still dies to a Scald. So Nier won game 1. Very unfortunate. Waiting for it to load. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. Okay, here we go. Thank God for that. And for game 2, we have a Starmie Magnezone fusion. This time, Nier's the one with a Sun team. Going into Photosynthesis Gengar Sandy Shocks, that's terrifying. Earth Power doesn't get the kill though, so that's fine. Choy Reception is huge. They go in the Glaceon. Unfortunately, the sun is set again, so you go back and Slow King. Thankfully, it's a special attacker, so you don't get killed by physical move, but still, pretty hard situation to be in right now. Luckily, Sandslash is one of the few Pokemon with spikes. You go in the Cleavor, but still, once again, this freaking Steelix Vaporeon's here, and just ruining Cyber's day. Thankfully, Cyber does have the entries up, so it's not unwinnable. Here we have a more offensive version of a Corviknight set with, I'd imagine, Tough Claws on Berserker. Doing decent chip, I would say, to the Steelix, all things considered. Ice Beam does a little more than a fourth, but with Wish, you're just not going to break it in time. So might as well use this into a safe switch into Slowking. Scald does get the burn. That is very annoying. And Nier switches with Flip Turn, goes into the Jolteon Charizard fusion, and thankfully it's just not in the sun right now. 1,000 Arrows hits the Articuno Clefable fusion, but not for a lot. You have to switch. Nier goes for U-turn. In comes the Gengar. It does take entry hazards, which is something. But unfortunately, Berserker kind of sucks, so even that Dazzling Gleam did pretty good ship, all things considered. At least Cyber took out the Heat Rock. They switch back into Gengar. And Cyber here, really bad spot. Like, extremely bad spot. Shadow Ball is going to hit super hard, and this Gengar is kind of in a position to just sweep a lot of things. Doesn't get the kill there, so he's switching the Vaporeon just to be safe. Knockoff does get rid of the leftovers, so it is possible for Cyber to still win this. Especially with all those hazards on the field. But now Gengar unfortunately gets healed with Wish. That's undoing all of the damage it took with entry hazards. We go back into these two. Goes back into the fusion with Vaporeon. It's taken out, so at least a Pokemon's finally KO'd now. In comes the Aerodactyl, and Leafeon goes for Sword Stance. And thankfully Cyber was faster. But now you have this terrifying Jolteon Charizard, which switches out. Goes back into Ninetales. But luckily you go for Cherry Reception. So that's honestly pretty good. You take the U-turn pretty well as well. There's the knockoff, gets rid of the leftovers. And Anir, expecting him to switch, like, goes for U-turn, but it was actually Spikes, which I can respect. Back into Slowking he goes. And there's the Psychic Noise on the Clefable Articuno. I don't know what's brain farting on that. Honestly, this moment is pretty annoying here. Not being able to go for Roost, but ended up being fine. You get hit with Sludge Bomb, just decent damage, but still, Cyber's is not breaking it. Back into Scizor, and this time he went for Psychic Noise, not Cherry Reception. This is honestly really bad. Thunderbolt does kill, but unfortunately, now Anir might be in the position to sweep. Shadow Ball kills. You go back into your Cleavor. Shadow Ball is a 2-hit KO. I think you are done with Sun though. Bullet Punch does absolutely nothing. You go into Slowking. But the burn chip I think probably does matter here a little bit. There's the Articuno. You go for Stone Axe, which nice, but still not really helping you too much. I think the Jolteon probably does sweep here, if I had to guess. Fire Blast miss, which that's unfortunate. Sludge Bomb does hit, but does it kill? I'm not sure. Psychic Noise does kill there, however, so that's always one thing going. You go into Magnezone. Fire Blast does get the kill. You go back into Slowking. And you do get the kill, so Cyber did win that at least. So that's good. I'll be honest, I kind of forgot Cyber won that. I remembered in my mind it being just a 3-0, which I'm glad that's not the case. And now it's time for round 3. We have Mew and Clefable and a Arcanine and Scizor. You go into Dragonite, which cannot fuse. Earthquake does get the OHKO, so that's immediate progress. The Weezing and Umbreon super hard to deal with. Cyber goes into Berserker, but now it's burned, so it's essentially useless. Goes for Knockoff, gets rid of the Black Sledge. Parting Shot is now used. Anir goes into Surfatchodactyl. There's Knockoff on the Sand Slash, now that's almost dead. You go for another Knockoff, which is not getting rid of leftovers, so that thing's already gotten a lot of progress off. Into Blissey, and now you just get a free switch into the Surfetch. You go into Slowbro, you go for Knockoff, getting rid of Rocky Helmet. So now Cyber has a lot of Pokemon that just are losing their ability, and it's hurting so much. Clefable hits the Mew fusion pretty hard. Not so much Blissey. Another Moonblast, and Blissey is forced to go for healing. Anir, I think, predicted a Protect, so they went for Calm Mind. Moonblast does not force the what's it called? Doesn't force healing yet, but still, Cyber did switch out. This thing's still burned though, which sucks. And back into the Vaporeon. which, once again, it's going to be hard for Cyber to break, especially with the Tangrowth being so low. At the very least, Spike or Stealth Rock Chip is pretty handy here. And now the Blissey will be forced to heal, but this is probably a situation where it's annoying that it's Wish exactly. Moonblast does pretty good chip, but it's going to be healed away. But still, you're forcing it, which is good. But in that case, Cyber actually switched, so the Blissey is actually going to be hard to, or easier to kill later on. The Tangrowth takes Stealth Rock damage. Giga Drain does hit, heals for a lot. And Nier goes for Flip Turn, goes back into Clefable. In comes Berserker, in comes the healing, in comes the Burn Chip, and then Vaporeon, which obviously this Berserker cannot hurt whatsoever. You probably get a free Wish here if I had to guess. And do you go for the kill? Even if you want to, you can't really. But still, you got the heal off. That's all that matters at the end of the day. I'm gonna... Actually, I don't need to. I was gonna try skipping, but now we have Dragonite that got hurt with Stealth Rock. So it was Choice Band. It's healed at least, but still. Ice Spinner is not doing that great of damage. You switch back. You go for Flip Turn. You go into Clefable. You decide to go for Calm Mind. Knockoff, unfortunately, was just not the right play there. And this was offensive Clefable, so that's why it was doing good damage. And now the Blissey is down. And if the Blissey is down, what other choice do you have? You are just not gonna survive that Clefable later. Swellbro is here, but honestly, the damage might already be done. This thing's gonna get a free heal. And also you scattered out Leech Seeds, that's always nice. You go for Teleport, and Psychic, Moonblast just does so much damage. And now, what exactly do you do? Moonblast doesn't get the kill, but yeah, like, Cyber, I just don't think can break this anymore. And Nier had one. There's Rapid Spin at least, but a little too late. Surprised he switched, but I don't think it's a big deal at the end of the day. And Nier definitely won this, so we can probably skip a little bit. There's the... I think that's a Gengar Moltres fusion. We haven't seen that yet, but... yeah, Cyber was not winning that. Okay, so I think we're getting close to the halfway mark. Or we need to watch, like, at least one in Losers Bracket before that happens, but I think this was the last one in Winners Bracket Finals. This time we have a Rain team versus the Tangrowth Scizor fusion that, you know, and Nier specifically said was used to deal with Rain teams. Whip Turn does a lot of damage to this Articuno here. You switch into a Jolteon Nidoking. You go into Tangrowth, which honestly can deal with this pretty decently well. So you're forced to switch, but the Volt Switch is basically nothing. You go into Tentacruel, you get hit with Knockoff, and that's no more leftovers. And even Bullet Punch does decent damage, all things considered. Which heals the Politoed, which thankfully you desperately needed. But now rocks are on the field. Post Combat does a lot of damage to this Water Dark Swellbro, but it wasn't enough. Whip Turn does kill the Gengar at the very least. In comes Tentacruel. There's the Moltking, which Thunderbolt did a lot of damage there. And Cyber actually stayed in, so... and Nier does get a KO at least. There's the Clefable, which eats that Earth Power. Volt Switch does do a lot of damage, however, but it sadly did not get the kill. Earth Power does kill the Jolteon there, so that's one of Cyber's main attackers, which is unfortunate. And Nier stayed in and went for Earth Power. Draco Meteor does get the kill, but this Politoed is as good as dead. Or at least I would have, but both of them got the heal there. I would say that probably was a decent trait, though, in my opinion. Both of you healing your red HP mons. Now, we have the last member of Nier's team, which is a Poison Fairy Slowking Galar with Wheezing, which I believe he did talk about when I was reading over his description. Even though Anir was like his main two, like attackers, the game is definitely still winnable. And a big part about that is specifically because that a lot of these regen mons were specifically made to deal with rain teams. I personally find that rather amusing. Back into the Tangrowth he goes. There's the Kabutops. Goes for close combat, doing absolutely nothing to the Slowking. Sludge Bomb does get super effective damage, but it's not doing that much. It just shows how high that thing's special defense is. Now, you go back into Tangrowth. It was going for Wish, so unfortunately you are going to get the heal there. Go for U-turn, go into the Slowking again. Go for a Leech Seed, but unfortunately with Chilly Reception, the rain is now gone. A Moonblast does super effective damage. I'm actually kind of surprised they switched out of the Articuno there. I kind of felt like Moonblast was just kind of free, especially since there wasn't any rain, but it doesn't seem like a big deal. Trying to use the Tentacruel just to block burns. However, the annoying part here is a Chilly Reception. Moonblast does nothing to this Tentacruel, which was this fused with Clefable? I'm honestly surprised that does so much damage. Or so little damage, I should say. Scald isn't doing too much damage either, but you do get the burn. And I guess at the very least, Sludge Bomb here is a 3-hit KO. But still, you do get the poison there, which that is absolutely huge. Like, holy crap. You go for a Chilly Reception, you go into Clefable, you're probably going to get a free U-turn or a free Moonblast, but you go for Stealth Rock, which is also just samely good in this situation. And now you have your Slowbro. Flip Turn doesn't really do that much. You go back into the Tentacruel, and now you... I don't know how Cyber wins this, to be honest. This seems like a really difficult situation to be in. Or honestly, like, that probably just goes without saying. Like, obviously, like I said, this is winner's final. So you already know that and then eventually wins this. It's just a matter of when and how. I do think we can probably afford to, like, skip a few turns, though. Close combat here with the Scizor against the Articuno, but didn't matter. You switch into Slowbro, and what does a Slowbro go for? It goes for Scald, which does nothing. A bit of a stall match here, but the important thing is that the Slowbro is just low health. There's hazards, and the thing is, it's poisoned. And as you saw there, Earthquake killed the... Honestly, that probably is just GG's right there. Unfortunately, Cyber made the wrong read and went for close combat. They went for soft boiled. So, Cyber just kind of forfeited there. Which I don't personally get completely... Or actually, yeah, it probably was in your favor. Okay, that's fair, actually. So now we're finally on to the Losers Bracket Finals between Funnyman and Cyber DJ. And let's just not waste any time and immediately get into it. We lead with Zapdos Moltres against Rhyperior Scizor. And that is Mew Electrode, which is that's a very interesting fusion, I'll say that. Funnyman gets the kill. They go on the Dragonite, which is now free to go for Dragon Dance, not having to care about a Will-O-Wisp. Now, Funnyman goes into Snorlax Machamp. This thing is pretty tanky, but enough to beat Scale Shot 5 times? Probably not. That's unfortunate. You go back in the Moltres, you fear Will-O-Wisp, so you go into your Mr. Mime Espeon. And now it's Moltres versus Moltres. But unfortunately, okay, we go from Moltres versus Moltres to Scizor versus Scizor. That's rather amusing. Bullet Punch does absolutely kills here. You go into your Slowking. Scald does get the kill. And there's your Brave Bird, Rockhead on Aerodactyl and Zapdos, but unfortunately get burned, essentially making it a little useless, which is very unfortunate. In goes your Rhyperior, but unfortunately you just get the wrong read, and Aqua Jet kills you. Go for your Dragonite, And they go for Sword Stance. You go for Bullet Punch. It does not get the kill, but neither does Fire Punch. So Dragonite is taken out. Aerodactyl also gets killed. Last is just the Moltres, which is taken out. Funny Man won game 1. And now we go on to game 2 once it is done loading. And by the way, like, just a reminder, I have a Discord server. We host stuff like this all the time. Also, if you're just finding this interesting, just feel free to subscribe. I would definitely appreciate it. That and like the video. For game 2, we have Zapdos and Articuno against the, I think it's the Clefable Mew again. Thunderbolt hits for really good damage. Honestly, for a fusion of Clefable and Mew, I feel like this thing just does not have good stats at all. Why does it take so much damage all the time? Either way, Cyber goes into Blissey. This can definitely wall any Zapdos Articuno fusion. But unfortunately, Funny Man gets a free switch into his Hitmontop Rhyperior fusion. With Technician, Loaded Dice, and Rock Blast, it hits a lot. You go into your Moltres Magnezone. Doesn't really do too much to Blissey, but you get another free switch into your Hitmontop. But then go to the Berserker. This Berserker has Knockoff, which does a lot of damage there. And so with Close Combat, which kills. In comes your Scizor Aerodactyl. Dual Wing Beat does do a lot of damage, but wasn't enough there. Go for Dragon Dance to switch into your Zapdos Articuno fusion. Cyber gets a free Roost off, and obviously an even freer Blissey switch in. Where do you go from here? Seismic Toss does good damage to this Scizor Aerodactyl. You go back, and you're just really not having a good time with those Stealth Rocks. They are hurting you so much right now. Even more so with Rocky Helmet. A free U-turn into Clefable. Now, this thing is probably going to get a free Moonblast off. But you don't bother. You just go straight into Calm Mind. And you go for Knockoff. You knock off the boots. Body Slam is a crit, and you do get the para. But do you have a way to take advantage of it? Do you have any good ways to hit Psychic? Doesn't look like it. So, Cyber just goes out for another Calm Mind. And you go for U-turn. You hit that Moonblast, which does get the kill, and the Wish is now null and void. Hitmontop gets a free switch in. You go for the Rock Blast, but it looks like it's just not enough damage. But you do get the para, which is huge. You go into Toadscroll, which will resist this. But as you can see, even here, it's doing a lot of damage. Giga Drain does nothing to your Articuno. You probably get a free Roost, which is nice. And Cyber just goes for free Spikes. In comes the Blissey. Really hard to break. You go back in the Wiki. But you're taking those entry hazards, which hurts so much. Dragonite here goes for a Roost. You go for Body Slam. And you do get the Paralysis, so that is something at the very least. You U-turn into your Zapdos. But they just go for Dragon Tail, forcing you to switch out. And Stealth Rocks will kill next time it's out. So the Zapdos is effectively dead. And Cyber has not lost a single Pokemon. I think the winner of this match is pretty clear if you ask me. We can skip a little bit because it's just a little bit of just these two for a bit. Now, the Zapdos gets killed. You go into Hitmontop. I think your only chance now is maybe getting a crit with a Rock Blast. Probably not going to be in your favor there if I had to guess. Or maybe it will because you get fully paralyzed. They go into Toadscroll. But Funny Man calls it with Triple Axle. Just going for upper hand, trying to predict a Scizor priority move, but you didn't get it there, unfortunately. Rock Blast does get a crit, and doing decent damage, it just wasn't enough. And you miss Rock Blast there, even worse. Go for Rock Blast again, and you don't get it, but they're fully paralyzed, so it's fine. Another Rock Blast, and that's killed. Go into Berserker, and Berserker is just kind of free right now, if I'm being honest. Doesn't matter if it's Tough Claws or Steely Spirit. The game is just over. We can try skipping a little bit, but there's only one way this can go. Yeah, so Cyber DJ won that battle. So now we're almost done with Loser's Bracket. And after this, we can We have one more after this of Loser's Bracket, and then we can watch Grand Finals. Okay, so this time Cyber's using his Stun Team again. So we have a lead Ninetales versus the lead Snorlax, which is very interesting. You go straight for Knockoff, which does get rid of the eject button, which is pretty nice. You go into Kingdra. Kingdra eats the Side Shock easily. Bullet Punch definitely kills, so you don't want to deal with that. You go for your Leafeon, Scizor Fusion. You go for Knockoff, doing a lot of damage to the Moltres. So far so good if you're Cyber. You go into Nidoking, but Flamethrower does a lot of damage because it's still a Nidoking fusion, so the defenses are not the greatest. Ice Punch would have done more, but unfortunately the Fire type makes it neutral. You don't get the kill, unfortunately, and they get a free Roostin. You have a bit of this for a bit, I'm pretty sure, so we can skip this for a bit. Moltres finally gets killed by the Espeon Mr. Mime fusion, but unfortunately Gengar Jolteon gets a free switch in. How do you deal with this? You go into your Sunsetter, which definitely has the tools to kill this thing, but unfortunately it goes for Volt Switch, which technically isn't the worst thing. You go in the Chlorophyll Executor. This thing is doing a crazy ton of damage. Bullet Punch does not get the kill, so Executor gets the kill there. In goes the Machamp, and Facade is just an OHKO, which is just crazy amount of damage. But now Cyber goes for a free Solar Blade, which definitely gets the kill. That thing is doing absurd power. Knockoff gets rid of the Heavy Duty Boot, so now Stealth Rock is an issue. In comes the Hitmontop. You go for Bullet Punch, and Mach Punch is enough to kill, so that's unfortunate. Mach Punch does not kill the Executor though, and it does get a heal. Life Orb damage is pretty scary, but simple answer to switch into your Sunsetter, and now you're just free to go for Life Orb Giga Drains. And you definitely need that healing because of the chip from Giga Drain. You heal with that, and they go for Seismic Toss. This does not have any dragon moves, so Cyber DJ won game, I think it's game 3. And now it's time for game 4. And this was, honestly, I forget how this one went. But we'll see in a bit. It's weird though, because I was here for this. Oh yeah, here we go. This is the team that I helped him with. Okay, this is the one with the Tauros. And basically the invincible Screamtail. So Moonblast does a lot of damage, but you are able to survive it. You definitely need a switch though, but luckily you have a very easy switch in with, the Sandslash fusion, which also gets a boost from the snow, which is always pretty nice. Pulse Combat doesn't really do that much to the Slow King, so you get to switch into Rhyperior. Intimidate is pretty nice here, same with Rocky Helmet. They are forced to switch to Vaporeon, and you go for Stealth Rock, a very easy Stealth Rock to go for. Switch back into your Sandslash. Freeze Strike is doing absolutely nothing here. You quad resist that easily. You go for Roost because why not? And they go back into their Arcanine. Unfortunately, that just means it is switching into the Moltres. And Close Combat is doing basically nothing here. Back into Slowking you go. Brave Bird is genuinely doing decent damage, but it's fine. You tank that. Thanks to your Fur Coat, you go for Protect. They went for Brave Bird again. You get free Lefties healing. You probably go for Wish here. Yeah, just as I thought. They switched in. You go for Protect again, which also makes sense. But you're fine. This is just completely fine. You go for Parting Shot. Switch in that easily, go into Alakazam. And you go for Encore, which is devastating. Oh man. There's the Rhyperior getting your free switch in. No Rocky Helmet chip because of Magikarp, unfortunately. Back in the Sandslash, eating up that Freeze Strike easily. Bullet Punch, unfortunately, is resisted, but you're mostly fine. You probably go for a free Wish here, which is just free, if you ask me. Vaporeon switches in, and you go for Protect. And this thing is just so hard to kill, it's insane. What do you switch into? You go into Sandslash. You predict them going to Arcanine and go immediately into Screamtail. They go for U-turn, they go into Clefable, you go for knockoff, you get rid of the Life Orb, which is actually a pretty big deal. Moltres can switch in pretty easily here. They go back into Arcanine, you go for Flamethrower. Even with Veil, I'd argue that's actually pretty decent chip, all things considered. You switch back into Vaporeon, but the rocks are just really digging into you now, and it's making these just very, really annoying if you're near. The Veil is set up, you go for Wish, and they switch into their Moltres, which does not have boots, so taking serious damage from those rocks. But thankfully, one of your signature moves is Oblivion Wing, so it's not the worst thing in the world. Fire Breath got the flinch, but doesn't get the second time, unfortunately. And Cyber does get the burn. I'd argue that's a big deal. Now, Oblivion Wing is doing a lot of damage there, but you go for Draco Meteor, getting a lot of chip damage in. But unfortunately, that does activate Berserk. You go on the Sand Slash, but they do survive. A Ice Shard should probably kill, and yes, it does. There it is right there. Go on the Arcanine, but just switching to Screamtail, there's really no reason why not to. They U-turn and go into Clefable. You go for Wish. You go back into Hyperior, Intimidate matters here. Play Rough is not enough. And now this Tauros is just in a good position to do a lot of damage. You get decent shit with Liquidation. You go into Slowking. You eat the Psychic. They go into Vaporeon. And you go back into Screamtail. Go for Wish. Moonblast does unfortunately do a lot of damage. You go for Parting Shot. And you go into your Slowking, which gets fully healed, which is a pretty... Well, it gets crit, which kind of sucks. But you get the burn, so it's fine. The trade was worth it. Moonblast is not enough to kill the Sand Slash. So now you go for Bullet Punch, that gets the kill. And suddenly, it's just really hard for Funny Man to win this at all. Especially with Rocky Helmet chip. Aqua Jet kills the Arcanine. You go back into Gengar. You switch to your Screamtail just to sack it off. But you're so bulky, you live it anyways. Not the biggest deal in the world, but kind of funny. They go on the Volt Switch. They go into Alakazam. You go into Slowking. Scald does a lot of damage. So now with the Sand Slash, it's free to just kill with Ice Shard or Bullet Punch. Ice Shard would have been better in case they switched into Scizor or Gengar. But it really doesn't matter. Cyber definitively won this game. With the team that I made. So this shows that my cooking is the best cooking, even though I did win the tournament. But that's a story for another day. Or not really, I'm not going to talk about it ever. But now we have the replays of the Grand Finals. Cyber DJ versus Anir. And let's get straight into it. So we have a Tangrowth Clefable fusion. Cyber immediately goes for a nasty plot. Fire Rat does 2-hit KO, which is nice. Anir is going to be forced to switch. They go into Umbreon. Draining Kiss does a lot of damage. This is going absolutely fantastic for Cyber so far. Draining Kiss kills the Umbreon. They go into Politoed. Thankfully, it's a Steel type, but you still get killed. In comes Surfetch. You go for Crabhammer, which gets absorbed with the Water Absorb. You go for Close Combat, but you get the weak critical hit. That is insane. There's Intimidate. You go into Cleavor. You go for Crabhammer. Once again, you get the crit. You go back into Toadscroll. Get another Intimidate. But once again, you get the crit. You now go back into Dragonite. You go for Gengar. And thankfully, like, Scale Shot can do something here. The Gengar survives, but still. Ice Spinner, that's good. You go into Kingdra. Thunder unfortunately kills. You outspeed. You go into Moltres. You get the Thunder anyways. And yeah, like, those crits were just devastating. How do you deal with that? That was like, what, 3 crits in a row? Back into Surfetch. Get the Crabhammer. You get the crit. You go into Tauros. And what do? What do? You get the crit. That was 5 crits in a row. That is just insane. Let's go on to the second game, shall we? Alright, wait for it to load. And thankfully the wait time for these loadings has not been that bad. So now, game 2. We have A return of this raw as heck looking Rhyperior Scizor fusion. Once again, Cyber goes for the nasty plot, but Moonblast this time kills. Looks like a near run from his mistake, and he was not going to fall for that again. In is the Nidoqueen going for Taunt. That's pretty nice. You get free Stealth Rock up. Foul Play's not doing that much damage. You go into your Zapdos Aerodactyl fusion, going for Knockoff, getting rid of the Black Sludge. They go for Will-O-Wisp, unfortunately, so now you're burned. So once again, this thing is essentially useless. Parting Shot just gives you free switching into the Dastardly Vaporeon and Steelix fusion yet again. Eject Button gave you a free switch into Dragonite though, so that's something. In comes the Umbreon. This thing's definitely gonna try to go for a burn. So you have to kill with Scale Shot here. Which thankfully you do get the kill. That's at least something. For Fables here, you go for Fire Punch, which it's just not doing the damage you needed to. You're now killed because it's Offensive Life Orb. And once again, Cyber's in a really bad place. Also, ignore whatever you saw in chat. But yeah, this is really, really hard to deal with if you're Cyber. You get the kill on the Vaporeon, but what good is that really gonna... Like, what's even the point now? It's just so hard to win in this situation. The Clefable gets the kill, and now Cyber only has 3 Pokemon left. Earth Power does get the kill on Clefable at least. In comes the Surfetch. Rhyperior loses its item, and you hit Bullet Punch. You don't get the kill. Post Combat definitely does get the kill. And what do you know? It's a crit. What are the chances of that? Brave Bird doesn't even need the crit. And once again, yeah, there's another loss. Okay, now it's time for the final replay of this video. And after that, I can finally end this. Waiting for the loading a little bit. If you're still here, I just want to say thank you for sticking with me through this entire thing. I really appreciate it. And now we have the final game. All Reliable goes straight into Blissey, and Nier gets free Stealth Rocks up. He goes into the Umbreon, while Cyber also gets rocks up. Seismic tossed this chip, but now it's poisoned. So, you have Natural Gear, so you are, obligated to switch now. And in goes into the Tank Growth Fusion, which should be able to take that, Mew Clefable pretty easily. Bullet Punch is practically nothing to the Steelix. You go in the U-turn, go in the Toadscroll. Knockoffs, no more boots, and now Rocks would have been an issue if you didn't have, Rapid Spin. But still, that thing's a low HP, so Rocks gets it up again, and you might be cooked. You get the special defense drop on the Rhyperior, but it doesn't really matter too much. Clefable gets sent out, gets hit with the Scald. It does a 4th, but you have leftover, so it's fine. In goes Calm Mind, but you get a free switch back into the Scizor. Knockoff here is a pretty big deal. No more Rocky Helmet. You heal, and they go for a U-turn, which does nothing. Back in the Jolteon, you predict a switch. You go into the Magnezone, go back for Rocks, and now you have the Boulder, which I believe is Rhyperior and Wallen Muck. This is another team that I was with Cyber with. I did help him finalize it, but I was with them in VC when he was trying to make something with this. The Steelix is taking Stealth Rock Chip, which is annoying, but thankfully, you're not taking too much damage from Knockoff. They go in the Gengar. At least you still have the Blissey, so that's the one thing stopping this Jolteon from destroying everything. And thankfully, Anir's doesn't have, coverage like Energy Ball or Hidden Power Ice, so you're fine. Perfect timing takes Volt Switch Chip and goes and gets hit with Intimidate, so I'm questioning the name. But now, it's looking like a pretty good position for Nier, if you ask me. You go back in the Blissey, they go for Thunderbolt, and this Blissey is now really forced to heal. They go for Soft Boiled, and I'm pretty sure this is Encore, so yeah, you are just kind of cooked now. That's a second nasty plot. You go back in the Blissey, You go for a Shadow Ball. But now what do? Nier even gets the crit. Bullet Punch definitely does not get the kill. And this Jolteon is now free to kill basically everything, if not literally everything. You have 2 nasty plots up, you were just not winning that. So that was the tournament. It was a lot of fun. And if you want to know what the next thing's going to be outside of the Minecraft server, it's going to be a round robin between the community and all of my council members. They're going to be for Gen 1 tournaments. I'll talk more about it later, but now that I'm finally done with this Infinite Fusion tournament, I am going to start doing regular Reddit videos again. So, I hope you enjoyed this. This took a long time to make, I think. I don't know what the time is, like, looking at it, but I'm going to imagine it's, like, at least 2 hours, but I wouldn't be too surprised if it's 3. But yeah, thank you for watching. And until next time, this is Groundback, and I look forward to hearing from you.